Hello, I'm Vince Poscente. In today's program, we're going to explore the topic of resilience, both personally in our communities and across the globe. Now, resilience is defined as the process and outcome of successfully adapting to difficult or challenging life experiences. We believe that either we have resilience or we do not. That some of us are more rugged and can withstand adversity better than others. We may even default to pep talks or self-improvement and motivational speakers to make us more resilient. But is that really the case? To answer that question, we've invited two experts to help us learn more about the science of resilience and how we may flourish. Our guests today are Dr. Andrew Nevin, who has an economics Ph.D. from Harvard and is an Oxford Rhodes Scholar. Andrew's latest work is with the International Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, focused on brain health and brain skills for individuals and societies. Also, we have Dr. Michael Ungar. He's a world-renowned expert on resilience, a family therapist, and is a professor at Dalhousie University in Halifax, Canada. He's put his work into practice with the World Bank, UNESCO, and the Red Cross. Mike, your scientific research has helped us put resilience into context. Could you put that into context for us?
Sure. Thanks, Vince. I think this idea of whether or not resilience is an individual trait like personal grit was very popular sort of 3 or 4 decades ago. But as the science has advanced, what we're beginning to understand much better is it's actually about this combination of being both rugged or having those individual qualities, but also being in facilitative environments. In other words, it really does depend on everything from good governance around us to whether or not we have family and supports and those extra little nudges to become our best self. So this conversation about resilience has really changed from an individual internal idea to one that now talks about us becoming our best self because of the social relationships, the opportunities we have, and indeed all these other factors around us that bring out our best selves.
Well, Andrew, that's a nice segue for us to explore the concept of flourishing and the importance of it. What is flourishing and resilience at the core of its essence?
Of course, the purpose of the economy can't be growing GDP. That has nothing to do with people. It has to be something about people. And the group that I work with were the group that really felt that flourishing was the best expression of what it is to be human, because it has issues of the idea of growth, it has the idea of resiliency, of course, that Mike's done so much work as a world-leading expert. It has the issue of social connectedness to it. So over the past decade, I've been working myself and others with people in the flourishing community to really try to bring this idea out and put it at the center of public policy. Because, of course, a little bit like Mike's work with resiliency, you might have this thinking that flourishing is something you do as an individual. But flourishing is something that you do in the context of the community, in the context of the structures, in the context of the public policy. So that's really what we're trying to put on the table. Flourishing is the purpose of public policy.
Mike, I'm going to switch back to you. Now, is resilience a character trait that some of us have and some of us do not?
Well, actually, I think building on what Andrew just said, I think the way we're beginning to understand it now is that it is some internal qualities, but it really depends more about being a process in which those internal qualities, they get realized. Let me give you a really concrete example, or two very different. When we actually look at the way a community would respond, say after a natural disaster, like a wildfire or an economic downturn, what we're actually seeing is that if you can get, insurance adjusters and other people to get in there and help people to rebuild after their homes and the infrastructure around them is destroyed, you're basically creating the conditions so that people can reconnect with their communities, get back to jobs, get back to their positive identities, feel like they're in control, all of these psychological ideas. But they're done through something as mundane as an insurance adjuster from an insurance company, making sure that you're settled and able to rebuild your house after a major fire or something like that. In other words, what we're now beginning to understand is that these individual qualities require environments. And we know that as well from even at the individual level. And Andrew, I imagine your work on brain health and this type of thing, but we know that good brains are raised by families which have enough resources to actually raise a child well. So no matter where the conversation starts, it always seems to end with this double focus between an environment that's rich in opportunities and supports, and that helps the individual to become, to flourish in ways that they want to become their best selves.
Great. So Andrew, let's tie flourishing back to productivity. What are your thoughts there?
Well, I think this is very interesting because when we come out with this concept of human flourishing and put it out there for public policy, you might say, well, isn't the economy going to suffer? And then, of course, we'd have a bit of a debate, and people might say if the economy suffers, we can't put so much on flourishing. I mean, we would argue flourishing is where we should focus. But I think what we're going to find as we get deeper into this is that, in fact, flourishing and the economy are, in a sense, synergistic. Let me give you some concrete examples of that. One of the things that's coming out of the United Kingdom, for example, is, they've been very concerned about productivity. Why is productivity so low? And why are they not able to increase it? And of course, there was that ill-fated prime minister, one prime minister ago, it's hard to keep track, in the United Kingdom, whose solution was to radically cut taxes to do this. But what the research is finding is productivity is low because health, both physical and mental health, is very poor in the United Kingdom, and they haven't had any policies to make that better. So then you have workers, particularly as you have an aging population, who are unhealthy, both mentally and physically, and they're not productive on that. So I think we're going to find the economists and the people who are more interested in concepts like flourishing and resilience are going to find over the next decade that the research, in a sense, comes together. And if you want to have a strong economy, if you want to have high GDP growth, not necessarily the aim, but still as a beneficial thing, you're going to have a productive and healthy society on that. So I think people are going to find there's more reason to invest in healthcare, more reason to invest in public health. Obviously, there's a lot more thinking about our mental health based on what's happened on COVID on that. So I don't see any contradiction between productivity and human flourishing. I think they're synergistic.
Yeah, let me just jump in there. And what Andrew is saying is borne out by a lot of the research as well. I mean, we're doing studies in oil and gas dependent communities around the world right now. We have some large projects in that way. And what we're actually understanding is that, those communities, the more that you have people inside those communities that are flexible, open to new ideas, embracing diversification, people who are able to look after their families better, who have more health, and that there's a network of social services and mental health services and childcare services and everything else that keeps families sort of vibrant and working inside these communities, the more likely you are to actually see industries that are going to be able to pivot and thrive and weather the economics up and, the storms that kind of come with the world price of oil going up and down. In other words, when you start talking about what makes a vibrant, economically viable community that's still within the oil and gas sector, that depends on that sector, what you end up talking about very quickly are factors like family well-being, individual well-being, worker well-being, and all these other supports. And I think sometimes we actually do this, but we've sort of we've kind of forgotten for some reason that the dominant way, especially in us kind of in sort of our cultural space, we just don't want to admit that most of what makes us thrive and resilient is not really inside of us. The one I always jokingly say about this is the meat inspector. I'm all for meat inspectors because they keep our supply of food very safe. And yet, when do we ever sort of pay homage to meat inspectors as a way that we can thrive? It's the most mundane and sometimes silly of things that actually create the conditions for us to feel safe and secure, and indeed, coming back to Andrew's point, productive.
No, well, I was going to say, just building on what Mike said too. I mean, I think you go back to the brain capital issue you mentioned before. Why have I made this journey from flourishing and resiliency to brain capital? Because you realize at the end of the day, it's the health of the brain, it's the performance of the brain that's kind of mediating everything on that. Because the question that I put to our group a few years ago was, well, if we want flourishing, what are the conditions? What conditions do we need to put in place to create flourishing? And that leads to kind of the brain health, the brain performance issues. And if you think about it, it's all mediated by the brain. But we've tended to think of brain issues in terms of either mental health or in terms of Alzheimer's, neurodegenerative diseases, and those are important. But one of the things the OECD is pushing, and also the Center for Brain Health at the University of Texas at Dallas, is thinking it more broadly. Everyone has a brain. Everyone is on a spectrum of their brain performance. I mean, it's amazing now when you go for an annual physical. I just had mine a month ago. 99% of what happens the neck down, even though it's the brain that's mediating how things are happening out there. So I think that there's going to be a lot of work in the next decade on this brain cap or brain performance issue, and you're going to get into issues because it's things like use stress. Use stress is the concept of the optimal amount of stress. When you go back to this productivity, if you have a society organized, an economy organized, so it's like the Hunger Games or the Squid Games, the productivity is going to go down. It has to do with emotional intelligence. It has to do with metacognition, so that's the ability of people to know how they learn. It has to do strategic reasoning, being able to focus in the correct way. It has to do with creativity. So we're going to find ways to start to measure that and build up the brain health, the brain performance of not just an individual who may face some mental health challenges or depression or neurodegenerative diseases, but of the whole population. And I can guarantee from a productivity viewpoint, from a standard economic GDP viewpoint, if we significantly improve brain health, brain performance, we're going to find we have a very healthy economy as well.
I'm sensing a theme here. We're not only making an investment in our systems and processes and communities, but also in ourselves. So, Mike, how can we make that investment in ourselves to build resilience?
Well, it really does start at any point in the life cycle. I mean, we know from studies, say I'm part of a large epigenetic study right now that's based out of Tennessee called the Candle Study. And what they're actually showing is that if you, say, invest in mothers while they are pregnant, and you decrease the stress and exposure to economic hardship or family violence and all these other things, you can actually see changes in the children after they're born. And indeed, that these are just less stressed babies that then go on to be better and ready to learn when they hit elementary school. So suddenly we're talking about this sequencing, whether we're right back at a child in utero, and then we're sort of sequencing that forward to say we have children who could be better able to learn and go on and become productive members of our society just by thinking about prenatal care, how access to good health care for women who are pregnant, and indeed de-stressing their environments and not, obviously mitigating exposure to violence. These are all sort of like upstream kind of ideas.
Right.
But then we also know that, once you're in the workplace as well, if you begin to say, create less toxic work environments, I mean, emotionally toxic, microaggressions, places that people don't feel safe, whether that is physically or emotionally, you also then create a more productive workforce. So there's always this kind of balancing act between any point in our life phase, we can intervene, not only by changing our cognitions and the way we think about things, but also by changing the environment to make sure people have the kinds of supports that they require to get through life well.
Now, Andrew, are there other ways that flourishing can relate to your research regarding brain health?
Well, I think that one of the things that we did in our flourishing work was really focus on there is a measurement of flourishing, and the people that are, I think, doing the best job in the world is the Harvard Center for Human Flourishing, and they have 6 dimensions of flourishing, which are the usual things you might expect, but also include things like character and purpose and virtue. And they really built a great community about that. But in our work, what we focused on more was what are the capabilities you need to flourish? And we unpacked it into 3, which were autonomy, resilience, which of course Mike's the world's expert in, and ability to connect. And we said that what you need to, if you want a flourishing society, flourishing individuals, you need to focus on building up those capacities within the people, both within the people, but within the systems, as Mike's work in resilience shows as well. It's not just about the rugged individual, it's around the whole system. So now you need to build up those 3 capacities on there. But then that's what led to the whole issue about brain health. So what does it mean to build autonomy in an individual? What sort of education system do you need? What needs to be happening in their brain? How do you take advantage of neuroplasticity so that at any point in life that they can strengthen their ability in reasoning the things that allow them to be autonomous? So that's the connection we see between the flourishing agenda as, what is the purpose of the economy? What is the objective of people's lives, and the brain health on that? And I think it's coming together very nicely. And a very fundamental point I mentioned before, what's the purpose of the economy? you can't answer a question about public policy unless you answer that question, because then you have no basis for it. But it's a similar thing here. Flourish, what's the purpose of having good brain health? And again, if flourishing is the purpose, then it's going to help to define what dimensions of brain health and brain performance do we want to focus on. But I also want to emphasize, again, I think that Mike brought up the example of interventions going all the way back to in utero, critically important. There's a global organization, Thrive by 5, which basically makes the argument that intervening below 5 years of age is the biggest leverage point we have in improving individuals' lives and societies. But I think if the most important developments in neuroscience over the last few decades have shown is just this incredible neuroplasticity. So the brain changes throughout the life. And as you have Professor Sandy Chapman, the very famous founder of the Center for Brain Health at the University of Texas at Dallas, and I mentioned the way she puts it is your best brain year is the one that's coming up. At any point in your life, you can really improve your brain health and your brain performance. And I think that's going to mean things like we're going to get smarter about interventions. Say, for example, middle-aged, a 55-year-old worker, as we have more of an economy that's driven by knowledge workers, and we have an aging economy, we want to keep people in the workforce. Otherwise, we're going to have declining GDP and a lot of issues. How do you maintain their brain health, brain performance at 55, at 60, 65, 70, so that they can continue to have flourishing lives and contribute to society?
Right. Well, okay, speaking of neuroplasticity, Mike, your book, Change Your World, you highlighted individuals and communities who have resilience strategies to overcome adversity. Tell us a little bit more about this.
Well, where that book came out of, and it kind of fits into a trend by a variety of people who are sort of saying we need a little bit more balance in this conversation between just putting the onus, because of course there's always the danger, and I know, Andrew, this is not what you're saying at all, so I don't want to, but there's always that danger when we talk about brain health that somehow we end up in that sort of very trite space of, well, everyone just meditate. Everyone just sort of look in the mirror and do self-affirmation. And this is actually not what the science is saying at all. It's a misrepresentation, largely by the talking heads on the popular television shows and stuff like that. What the science is actually saying is that those moments of neuroplasticity also depend on resource-rich environments, so that you can develop your capacity to brain. I always jokingly say, before you go to your run to your meditation class to meditate, make sure that someone is providing adequate childcare to your kids, so you're not madly dashing to the yoga studio, to the exercise studio, to the meditation class. Make sure you have some sort of understanding that we do better, and that the changes we'll make from a neuroplasticity point of view are more sustainable when we're embedded in communities that actually support that process of change. So, it's like you're going to make a New Year's resolution, right? And you're going to go get a gym membership. I say, don't do that. Buy 2 gym memberships, because it's the second gym membership with a friend that then creates a catalyst, a motivation for you to fulfill an internal process that you're engaging in to make a change in your life. So the locus of control isn't just inside of us, which is what we want to believe. It's as much outside of us. That friend who calls you up one morning and says, hey, you promised to come to the gym every morning. Get out of bed, come now.
Andrew, you've got a thought waiting.
So I was just going to say, I've had actually exactly the same feeling. I know, Mike, that you made the point in your resilience work that this idea of kind of an individual action is just really limited. I've had exactly the same feeling sometimes in the flourishing community, where again, the meditation, the individual pursuit of brain health, et cetera, you're absolutely right. What it is kind of the systems and processes and the relationship between the public policy and those systems, and how work is organized, and with the individual that is powerful on that. It's not enough if we could meditate our way out of all of the challenges that we face, the deaths of despair, the increased obesity, the increased loneliness in North America, we would have already done it. So I think we need a lot more focus on what are the public policy processes and what the organizations do to be able to support this, so people can flourish, have the resiliency, have the brain health that we're talking about. So I couldn't agree with you more on that, though I do like to meditate.
Yeah, me too.
Oh, nothing wrong with that. It's just out of context. If that's the only thing you're doing and the rest of life is still toxic and uncomfortable, it's just not going to have a lingering effect. That's what the research shows.
Okay, so we're talking a lot about process here. We're talking a lot about being very conscious of how we're going to approach our own personal lives and our communities. But let's just go back to does happiness, Mike, and this is for you, does happiness make us feel more resilient?
Well, absolutely, an elevated mood, a sense of all that sort of emotional aspect. I mean, for instance, if you look at some studies of aging, we know that a positive attitude towards aging is sort of the equivalent of never having smoked in your life in terms of an advantage in terms of life expectancy. So there's something about happiness and contentment and all of that stuff. But if again, this is not, you can't just simply stand in front of the mirror, Vince, and affirm that I'm happy. It's a little bit of, I need to then go put myself into situations, or I need to ritualize my life, such as I go to the same coffee shop every morning and the person delivers to me my same order, which creates a sense of my world being sustainable. Optimism is created by a predictable, safe world, not just something I do inside my own head. And happiness is kind of the same. Even the pundit, Martin Seligman, others who have been in this flourishing world, right? They shifted from just that focus on the individual thinking positively to saying, no, I think we've also got to talk about racism and violence and economic hardship so that more people can actually experience the conditions in which they will thrive. And that's that sort of delicate balance. You don't have to be, and I know, Andrew, you're not saying this either. You don't have to be wealthy. You don't have to be incredibly wealthy to be happy. But you do need community and safety and security and trust in your institutions and these kinds of other things, which will actually increase or elevate your mood.
But I'm very, very curious. We're catching you in Nigeria, where you live, your family's there, and in a developing country. Let's explore how we promote brain health and flourishing. Is it different in a developing country? And summarize that in 3 sentences or less.
Well, I think it's a little bit different here in Nigeria because you have such a young population. So, I mean, we're very concerned in North America about Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, and neurodegenerative diseases. Here, we're more concerned about brain skills and the mental health of young people. So that has to be the focus that we're doing here. But I mean, I've introduced the term brain capital into the Nigerian discourse. I've used it on television, in the media many times. It's now getting picked up on it. And I've said the most valuable asset that Nigeria has is its brains. And of course, the term brain capital is very important from the OECD because it expresses this idea that it's an asset that we need to invest in. So I'd like to see brain capital be a concept that's used in Nigeria and here in Africa. And I'd like to see it be a concept that's used in North America and Europe and around the world. It's the most valuable asset that an individual and a society has. You take care of your assets.
Well, Mike, you've worked with UNESCO. What has your research found in terms of developing countries and resilience?
Well, definitely this youth capital, this huge youth dividend, which is emerging in crisscross Africa, Central America, et cetera, et cetera. We really do need to pay more attention to it. But what we've actually seen is, at least in my work, is that when you provide partnerships across community, government, NGOs, educational institutions, and indeed businesses as well, those kinds of collaboration seems to pave the way for opportunities for the next generation to really thrive, get their education, get into stable relationships, find meaningful opportunities to connect to their community and make a contribution back. And indeed, all of those factors come together to produce not just resilient individuals, but it's kind of like a domino effect. A bunch of resilient individuals falling over, tipping into each other, then create resilient communities that are less prone towards violence, political disruption, war, et cetera, et cetera. And ultimately, that's really what we're striving for, isn't it? Not just an individual resilience, but a community doing well.
All right, Andrew, we're looking for some closing thoughts, specifically with regards to resilience. What overall advice would you leave our viewers with?
Well, I think my advice is to listen to Mike. I mean, he's a world expert. I mean, I've always followed this myth of, this kind of individual, rugged, resilient, overcome everything. I think all of Mike's research and what his colleagues have done have shown it's not an individual. I mean, the individual needs certain attributes, but they do this within a context. And I would say to politicians, I mean, think about what's important. How is it possible that someone stands up, I think always in the Canadian context, so the Prime Minister of Canada stands up and celebrates 3% GDP growth, and yet we have social connectedness on the decline. We have loneliness increasing. It's at epidemics. We have deaths of despair. We have increasing drug usage. We have physical challenge with increasing obesity, and we don't measure those or act on those in a way that's consistent with actually caring about the population. GDP growth, GDP numbers of no use, as I started out saying at the beginning of this, if it doesn't result in people doing better, and resiliency is a big part of it. But Mike has done the research. He's shown it absolutely stone cold what is the foundation of resiliency. And so I think my best advice is listen to Mike.
Well, there you go, Mike. There's your entree. Bring us home, based on your research, how do we flourish in society today, which is full of uncertainty?
Yeah, I think what we need to do is, and this is such a lovely panel, because what you've done is you've added the social scientists and of course the economists together. What we really are saying is it takes a lot of different systems working together. Never overestimate that, public institutions and good government, but also good schools, an excellent teacher, early access to prenatal care. I mean, we have the capacity, the science already to figure out how to make people more resilient, longer term, and to create better and healthier communities and societies. We kind of have the roadmap. I don't always see the political will, or indeed the institutional will, to put all those ideas into practice. But gosh darn, I mean, just between Andrew, what you're hearing here today, there are so many great ideas out there, and we just need to sort of, I think, have the guts to go forward and say, hey, we've got these ideas, let's see them actually in practice.
Well, if I could summarize, it's really making sure that we lean into the ways that we can be resilient ourselves, but also how resilience can be part of our community as well. So, well, gentlemen, we've run out of time, but I don't think curiosity on the topic of exploring resilience. So thank you both for your time and lifetime of research and joining us today. Now, to our viewers, this is part one of our two-part exploration into what impact resilience can have on our lives. Part two, our guests define the essence of resilience from their extraordinary life experiences. And to you, thank you for joining us today. We trust that the different perspectives you heard will give you more clarity regarding the news and issues as they pass by us daily. As always, we continue talking about things that matter with people who care, thanks to viewers like you.